Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are not in Brazilian time, or good morning if you are in Asia, maybe. Welcome to this webinar promoted by the Pulitzer Center in partnership with the Open Society Foundation, Info Amazonia, La Liga contra el Silencio, and Armando Info. It's a pleasure to host this session. I'm Gustavo Faleiros, Environmental Investigations Editor of the Pulitzer Center. And today with me here, we have journalist Bram Ebbos, Manaka Infante from the Open Society Foundation, and Rodrigo Pedroso, journalist from Brazil. I will start soon with the presentations and introducing better our participants, but I would invite all of you to send a message on the chat, introducing yourself, saying your name and where you're speaking from, for the others to know who is participating. It's always good to know that we are in community. But today we're going to have the chance of listening a very interesting panel about a recently launched project called Amazon Underworld, which has its first story launched on last Thursday and will keep publishing stories about crime and corruption in the Amazon rainforest. It's a project that has a transnational cross-border nature. It was an investigation done over a year. And that's why we think that's a very important moment for us to share more how it was done, what are the main findings, the next steps. And we have here with us some of the key people involved in the project. As I said, the project was launched in partnership by Info Amazonia, an organization based in Brazil, Armando Info, based in Venezuela, and La Liga contra el Silencio in Colombia. It was both funded by the Pulitzer Center that I represent and the Open Society Foundation. I want to say before I introduce our participants that this project was part of a program that we have here at the Pulitzer Center that's called the Rainforest Investigations Network. We had the honor of having Bram as one of the fellows of this network last year and publishing now the results of its investigation. The Rainforest Investigations Network is a community of journalists from the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia with the goal of investigating the root causes of deforestation and the destruction of rainforests. And for that, we use a lot of data journalist techniques, really in-depth stories. And as I was saying, and we're going to see it today in the case of the Amazon Underworld, the importance of collaboration. Like some of these stories are so complex that they cannot be done without collaboration, without a cross-border effort. And this is really the case of this project that we're going to talk today, because it was done by journalists from Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and Brazil. And you will see when Bram is presenting. Well, I think I have to explain a little bit about the dynamics. We'll have 3 short presentations from our guests. They will talk no more than 10 minutes. Bram's going to do a slideshow with the key findings and the features of the project. Then we hear from Manaka and then from Rodrigo, and there will be time for Q&A, question and answers. You know the feature here of Zoom. You can start posing your questions on the Q&A session of the software. And yeah, and then we can have a fruitful debate after the presentations. Let me start introducing Bram Ebbos, which is a colleague that I have the pleasure of being working over the past 3 years. Bram is both a criminologist and a journalist, has done several good stories for outlets like Al Jazeera, Info Amazonia, also has been publishing reports and analysis with the Crisis Group, and was a Rainforest Investigations Fellow for the cohort of 2022. And he's the lead investigator, the main journalist coordinating the collaboration of Amazon Underworld. So Bram, tell us the main inspiration for doing this project, why you decided to congregate so many journalists to investigate this. We know the issue of organized crime became a priority when we're discussing the Amazon, especially last year after the tragic event with our colleague Don Phillips and anthropologist Bruno Pereira in the Brazilian Amazon. I felt the issue become much higher in the agenda, in the global agenda. So I want to hear, and our guests certainly want to hear more about the project and the main findings of the investigation. Bron.
Okay, thank you so much for this introduction, Gustavo. And maybe to straight away answer to your first question, what my inspiration is, and I think it's definitely the criminals operating in the Amazon, because they've been able to work across borders despite linguistic and cultural barriers, forging friendships with the counterparts in other countries and operating as a smooth machine in the Amazon. They've been so professional that I thought in our journalistic efforts to cover crime dynamics in the Amazon, we need to be as smart as the criminals. So we need to work on a cross-border team with the best investigators in different countries who might speak different languages, have different cultural backgrounds, but it's the only way that we can understand these criminal networks as well. So we started working on this alliance of several media partners, of journalists from different countries, to be able to understand the protagonists of what we call the Amazon underworld. We've been able to consult with drug traffickers, illegal miners, gang members, representatives of non-state armed groups, because oftentimes these people belong to the Amazon. They've been born there, they've been raised there, and they don't like it that they need to destruct the environment or commit harm to local communities. But oftentimes there is no alternative livelihood, because we feel that it's not so much that the governments abandoned these regions, they never showed up. And since there is an international demand for Amazon commodities, there's all these crime dynamics at stake, especially in the fringes of the Amazon borders. And we wanted to understand better what was going on, because we saw that definitely since 2016, violence has been spiking, massacres, homicides, but also the affectation of indigenous populations and environment has been much worse than what we've seen before. So let me just share a few slides to just give a few indications of what we're talking about. So first of all, we built this interactive platform called Amazon Underworld, which we published in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, so we can approach both an international and a local audience. We've been building stories based on field research, but also constructing databases using satellite imagery to be able to not only narrate the Amazon underworld from within, but also to show the scope of its impact. This first picture is what we call a draga, a colossal mining barge who suck up sediments from the riverbed to process it for gold. Each draga can extract about 3 kilos of gold a month if they have a good month, and they generate extraordinary wealth in the Amazon. Sometimes they generate so much money that it's difficult for states to counter. These dragas have a huge environmental impact. They change the course of rivers, use the toxic quicksilver mercury in the extraction process, which contaminates the waterways, enters the food chain through fishes, which end up in the diets of local communities. And there's deforestation. As you can see in this picture, the draga eats away at the forest. The large spot you see around the draga is not part of the river. It's deforestation. Then they change the course of the water. Then it's in the draga in. This is just one draga. And on a tiny river that we visited in a Japurá municipality in Brazil, there's at least 150. Here's a few more of them. So when you ask the question, how is it possible that these dragas operate in plain sight? Because they're so big, they're slow to move. It should be easy to stop them. Nevertheless, there's the factor of corruption in the Amazon, which means that if the authorities basically look the other way for payments, these dragas can enter the most fragile ecosystems and protected areas. When we speak about environmental harm, this is definitely the first argument to investigate and report on these illicit economies. But then there's also the case of conflict financing. The river we investigated for illegal mining is a cross-border river, which springs in a national park in Colombia, inhabited by an indigenous tribe, the Yuri Pasé, which is a tribe in voluntary isolation. They haven't had contact yet with the outside world. Over this river from Colombia to Brazil, we see guerrilla groups crossing the country border, starting to collect payments, extortion payments from illegal miners, and they do this in gold. What we see here is what they call a Vikingo or a Viking, which is the receipt of a FARC dissident groups, which they give to the legal miners, which says aporte voluntario, which is like a voluntary contribution, which of course is It's not voluntary, but this is what the FARC dissidents forced the miners to pay to them as a sort of war tax. Nevertheless, what also happens is that on this exact river, the miners want to protect themselves. So they're paying another armed group and be able to fend off these FARC dissidents. So when we went to the river, we knew we could run into a Colombian guerrilla organization. We knew there were river pirates, and we knew the miners could be weaponed as well, since they all have a shotgun lying around in the boats. What we never expected is that we would be intercepted, stopped, intimidated, threatened, and forced to hand over our memory cards by the Brazilian military police. Because deep in the Amazon, it's their domain. There's no eyes, there's no witnesses, and they're able, as a state armed force, to collect extortion fees in gold from illegal miners, just on this river worth $3 million a year, which they pocket to protect these boats. And of course, they don't want any journalists snooping around or asking the wrong questions. That's why we thought that we also need to map the presence of organizations, criminal organizations and non-state armed groups throughout the Amazon. Because in the end, we departed from a position of not really knowing who is operating in the Amazon, who fights with which other group, who has supply chain relations with another gang. So we asked our journalists to consult primary sources in the municipalities, especially in border areas, to identify illicit economies, but also the presence of crime syndicates of non-state armed groups. What we found was a staggering amount of 70% of the municipalities that we investigated had presence of criminal organizations and non-state armed groups. This means that when we talk about state abandonment or a lack of presence of governments and state institutions in the Amazon, this doesn't mean that the Amazon is uncontrolled. There's definitely a form of governance, but this governance is criminal, and this is definitely bad news. So this is the overall map that we constructed. You see different colors because we speak about different groups. First of all, when we look at the National Liberation Army from Colombia, which was founded in the year 64, historically operating on the border with Venezuela. But now we witnessed that they basically took charge of many of the mining regions deep into Venezuela, bordering Guyana and Brazil. We also see that the FARC dissidents, which are guerrilla factions who never lay down their weapons or rearmed after the failed implementation of the 2016 peace agreements in Colombia, they started operating on a larger scale in the Amazon and crossed the borders to Peru, Ecuador, not only for sporadic incursions, but they set up camp, started controlling populations and territory, and started incentivizing deforestation for coca plantations. Then, of course, in Brazil, it's a different panorama because there we see urban gangs, especially from Sao Paulo, PCC, and Rio de Janeiro, Comando Vermelho, two urban, gigantic criminal multinationals who started working in the Amazon. Basically, they came to control cocaine trafficking routes, but they stayed for the gold, the timber, wildlife trafficking, and they broadened their criminal portfolio, reaping incredible jungle riches from the rainforest. Nevertheless, both groups had a non-aggression pact, which was broken in the year 2016. A year later, we saw the prison massacres in Boa Vista and Manaus, and basically the war for the Amazon in Brazil started. But then PCC increased their hold over the border with Venezuela, recruiting migrants and refugees as disposable soldiers or sending them into the illegal gold mining pits. PCC also entered Bolivia. But then Comando Vermelho expanded across the border with Peru, especially recently violently confronting the Peruvian National Police as well, basically marking territory and especially operating in prisons. These were just some slides to give an idea of the products that we've been working on and the investigation that we have been doing. So Amazon Underworld has been launched last week, but we will have more publications which will be released over the course of August. So this was just a taste of it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that might come up in the following hour.
Bram, just before we continue, thank you for your presentation. There's one question asking about the name. Why this name? Why you decided using this name, Amazon Underworld?
Because with the Underworld, we basically refer to an area, a gray area where there's no legality, but there is control. People are hiding money flows, interests. Sometimes you go to a village in the Amazon and there's a lot of people looking at you, but you don't know who they are. they basically hide in what we call the Amazon underworld. And we don't think it's a negative connotation. It's rather the reality. It's just an area often forgotten, especially by policymakers. And it's people living in a sort of anonymity, where we also want to give a face and a voice to certain interest groups. So when we basically travel to the Amazon underworld, we hope to interact with their protagonists and also understand the problems. Because if we keep consulting the same experts outside of the Amazon, and if we don't take into account the people who are oftentimes criminalized and stigmatized, we don't understand it. And this is why we also chose this name.
Wonderful. We'll have opportunities for more questions, so keep the questions coming in our Q&A session. And now we're gonna hear from Manaka Infante, who is a member of the Baniva people of the Amazonian region of Venezuela. She's the senior program officer of Open Society Foundation, focusing on citizen security and justice. Welcome, Manaka, again. And we want to explore a little bit about the public policy implications of an investigations like this. Why, again, this same question, why talking about criminality and organized crime is such a key thing in the Amazon at this point?
Thanks, Gustavo. So yes, Manaka, work at Open Society Foundations, leading the foundation's work on citizen security and justice for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thanks for having me. I want to congratulate the Amazon Underworld team for the fantastic work done. And we at Open Society are happy to have collaborators with some portions of the work. You did, for example, the protocol security that you develop. And yeah, we believe in civil society and its key role of playing in proposing solutions for citizen security and violence concerns. So let me first say a few things about Open Society. As you may know, we work on different topics in the region. We work on climate justice, gender, and racial justice, and other intersectional areas. But we have a particular focus and interest and a long history of working in reducing violence in the region. So for several years, as you know, the region has kept the top position with the highest homicide rates. So it's a genuine interest in the foundations on reducing violence because it's the most violent region in the world, Latin America. So let me say a few aspects also on your question and why I consider it's important to work collaboratively on this, not only from a journalistic perspective, but also from a public policy perspective and a commitment for international community, for governments, for donor communities, and for society as a whole. So the first thing for me is that it is urgent to change the response. What is the response? Every time insecurity in the Amazon makes the headlines is militarization. So traditionally militarization has been this response, and we have seen that it has always failed. So we need to try different models. We need to try different perspectives in designing new strategies to address the violence in the region. So that's why showing this information is important, to call the attention and to think differently this time and how we want to address the issue. So we don't want that after showing this information, we bring more militarization to the region, because we know already that is not the solution. So many things to consider. One is the issue of governance. So all the states have the duty to ensure security for its people. As Brand mentioned, a criminal system governance is in place. So recognizing and acknowledging that this criminal governance is in place is key to design a proper response. So another element that we need to think in designing new strategies, and why it's important and why it's also difficult, is that the Amazon is very different. For example, you see in Brazil, we have cities such as Belém, Manaus, and in some of them with some of the highest homicide rates in Brazil in the last years. We see at the same time very small towns in Colombia and Venezuela, for example, with different levels of violence. So crime dynamics may be related but affect differently. And why is this important? It is important because if we want to tackle violence, if we want to take the opportunity of taking advantage of this moment in bringing new solutions to the Amazon, we need to also recognize that most evidence-based violence reduction initiatives are tested in urban settings. Not many of them are tested in rural settings. So we need to take into account this in designing new strategies for the Amazon along with communities. This take us to the main conclusion that we have so far for me at this stage, is that we need a new model for security for the Amazon. So current models have failed, clearly. So we need to think differently, and how we can decide a security model that is people-centered, that is indigenous peoples, quilombolas, and other communities living in the Amazon center. And also how we can define effective protection mechanisms for social leaders. This will be an important part of any strategy for security in the Amazon. I also think that is key and is important to work on violence, on addressing violence in the Amazon, is because how important the Amazon is for energy transition. So while international community is engaged in energy transition, it is less clear how transition from fossil fuels to low carbon energy sources will depend on critical minerals. And I can mention the example of my own country, Venezuela, where illegal extraction of critical minerals such as coltan is denounced continuously. So, and a strategy to safeguard the Amazon should begin with a basic understanding on which energy transition we want to achieve. Another element that for me is the most important is that people that live in the Amazon are particularly exposed to the greatest vulnerabilities. So how the donor community is addressing this is not just talking about rich area with natural resources with high levels of violence, but because there is a huge gap in implementing rights of indigenous peoples, quilombolas, and other communities living in the Amazon. So I'm saying that their most basic rights are not guaranteed, and they're living in these high levels of violence. So we may be also losing ancestral knowledge that we could even lose it before giving it an opportunity to show to how valuable it is for humanity. I will say the final element is that there is a political opportunity right now in which it's not a secret that the Amazon was never a priority before, but is now a priority for Amazon basin countries. It is the world is looking at the Amazon. Progressive governments in the region have already said and have already stated enthusiastically their interest in working on the Amazon, and this is an opportunity to do it right. So it's an opportunity not only for governments, for the donor community, and for society. So I'll leave it at that. Gustavo, over to you.
Thank you, Manaka. This is great and gives us a very good overview to continue the discussion, especially now, as you know, we have this summit happening in Belém, in Brazil, with several presidents. And one of the issues that is on the core of the discussion is how to create public policies like the ones Manaka were discussing and move forward with the future of this region, really, because I think Bram brought a very, I'm just throwing few things here for you guys to also bring some questions. Was the risk of stigmatization of the region, you know, like, oh, this is just a region full of violence. And I think what Manaka brought to us is like how to be more, you know, like precise. It considers the regions that need a focus, and several other aspects like the indigenous issue that is connected to this, you know, and the opportunity also with this green transition that we are listening too much. I think it is all the elements that we can leave for discussion as well once we've finished with the presentations. I will invite Rodrigo Pedroso, which is a Brazilian journalist and sociologist focused on environment and human rights. He has covered post-conflict in Colombia, and currently is doing a lot of great stories in the Amazon rainforest. I invite you and recommend you to read many of his stories published in Piauí in Brazil, BBC, El País, CNN, Internazionale of Italy, has done several good investigative stories. So Rodrigo was part of the investigative team working in one of the first stories published about the gold mine Dragas. And I know, Rodrigo, you have a big experience on covering issues of conflict in the borders. You also have covered issue of narco traffic, influence in the Amazon region. So I would like to invite you to talk about the experience of doing Amazon Wonderworld as a collaborative journalistic project, and also what are the insights after working on this investigation. Rodrigo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking some time to hear us. And hi, all attendees. And thanks, Gustavo, for thoughtful words. Well, I've been working on cross-border themes in Amazon for the past maybe 4 to 5 years. And I think with the Amazon Underworld project, I saw that some dynamics are much more ingrained across the territory than I thought so before. For instance, our gold mining story on Japura region, it started with a lot of different people telling me for the past 2 years, like, oh man, you have to go to defend Japura. You have to go to see that illegal gold mining site. You have to go. So we went there to check it out, and it was big. It was like the first time a journalistic crew went to that gold mining site. To the point where some Brazilian state law officers asked how it was there on the site, because they didn't went there for the past time and years. So from my opinion, from my experience, I think that the environmental crimes and other type of illegal activities in the Amazon are becoming way more organized and way more ingrained in different territories, and it's increasingly become cross-border, which is become very increasingly difficult for local and federal governments to tackle this issue. And I think that Amazon has always been like a more or less recipient for illegal activities, being as a root or producer of some of them. But we have to see that in the past 4 to 5 years, things have got really worse, especially in the Brazilian, Peruvian, and Colombian border. So we're in the moment where the countries are starting to get together to see how they can work together to tackle those issues. And it's from our perspective, it's very welcome, because if they don't do so, and soon, it will become increasingly hard for the state governments and federal governments to tackle these issues directly. So I think that with the project, I learned that maybe the organized groups are not so disconnected from each other that I thought so before. And also that we are increasingly seeing that different type of illegal activities are becoming more and more intertwined. And that is really, really hard to untangle once they are intertwined. For instance, drug trafficking money with illegal gold mining money, they mix together, especially drug trafficking money is using illegal gold mining activity to launder their money. So when those two type of activities go together, we have this kind of big power group on a territory, because we are talking about two highly profitable activities taking control over some territory. And when they do so together, we have like one armed force and another really powerful economic force working together. So if I continue to cover the Amazon region, we expect to see increasing this type of marriage, let's say so, and I think it's kind of bad news for us as citizens of those countries.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Okay, we have questions. I'm pretty sure we'll have time as well. Someone is going to ask, otherwise I'm going to ask a little bit about the security measures you took for doing this work. I'm seeing some familiar names here. I know some good journalists are watching us, including one of the participants of the investigation, former RIN fellow Ivan Brejoa from Peru is also here. So thank you, Ivan, for being part, and many other journalists that I know from Colombia, from Brazil, from Peru, who had introduced themselves. So I'm pretty sure they would like to know more. But I'm gonna bring some of the questions here that I'm seeing. So Carola Ramos has asked to the group, but I think maybe specific to Bram, but what is the expectation with the mapping and is spreading the data itself, the findings in a format that is not only the stories itself, but there is like the project methodology, the project data set, the visualizations that aim and inform the civil societies and authorities. So how do you expect this data to actually inform civil society and authorities? That's the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Carola, for the question. So the data is publicly available for everybody, and we want to inform. We are not policy makers, but we are definitely agenda pushers. And we think that the Amazon has become a very unsafe place. But oftentimes it's very difficult to identify who are these groups, what are the threats, and are they operating outside of their historical territory? So we think that, of course, there are many NGOs or others mapping around presence, but they don't use primary sources. Since we have been able to go at the grain, we think that it's a different kind of methodology, which rather reflects a different panorama. So we know also, because I'm right now in Belém do Pará presenting a project, that there is a lot of interest of policymakers of all sorts in this kind of information. But it's also dangerous information if it's not accompanied by the right story, because as Manaka maybe also pointed out, it's not the idea that these kind of maps or projects instigate militarization of the Amazon. It rather lays bare an ineffective state policy, an absence in the Amazon, because also by giving a voice to the unheard people in the Amazon, we can convert the message of them into a broader explanation of the state is absent. There's no education, no future plans for use, there's no health system. So if the states don't govern the Amazon, criminals will do so. And if the answer is militarization, we go back to all the problems we've been observing for the last decades in Latin America. So besides the maps, we also have a message of the people from the Amazon about what is going on, why they're making certain life decisions. And if we don't understand them, it will be very difficult to come up with policy. So this is definitely the case. And of course, we hope to continue with Amazon Underworld. This is basically a first overflight that we're doing. And if we can keep alimenting these maps over the years, we can show trends. Which group is growing, which one is diminishing, what our government response is actually achieving in the Amazon. We will have the information to back to up.
Yeah, so there's actually one question from an anonymous attendee here asking exactly this. So the plan is to continue to enrich the platform, to enlarge the information, and do you have a timeline for that?
A timeline.
Hard question from my end.
I think first of all, we all need a rest, and then definitely the idea is to broaden the lines, maybe involve more people, deepen investigation, reflect on security, reflect on methodology, and also keep scouting for more unheard stories about the Amazon, because this is just a taste of it. And we also know that there's a lot of interest for this kind of content, also from policymakers, the general public. But we also want to make our journalism more accessible for the people in the Amazon. Of course, we have a nice website, which sometimes can be a bit heavy to load because it has so many visualizations. We're also thinking maybe for some in-print material that we can distribute, work more with community radio stations, to be able to broadcast in the Amazon as well, where there's no internet or other access to media platforms.
Sounds amazing. To work with local radios and outlets. There's a question here that I think, Manaka, you can help us with your insights. How you can what are the best strategies to fight these groups, in your opinion? From a state perspective, I mean, when the states so many times are accused to be involved or even associated with these criminal organizations. Do you have any opinions about that?
Yes. Well, I think now is the opportunity to do things differently, as I said, and we need to bring holistic approaches. So the law enforcement part is important, but it's not enough, and we cannot do it as the only way to address the issue. I'll say one of the most important things that we can do now with the renovated interest of the international community is first bring economic justice for people living in the Amazon, bring different economic models that really are sustainable for them, for indigenous Quilombolas, rural communities. So bringing economic justice is key. So I think we should explore our harm reduction approach for all the illicit economies going around the Amazon. I think we need to also talk about land demarcation, securing indigenous territories will be part of the solution to the problem, and giving rights to those that have not enough access or have not warranted access to their lands. I think we need on the collaboration of the law enforcement part, I will say we need to have some sort of coherence in what are the environmental crimes, for example, or what are the tools for investigation and sharing information across countries, improve coordination around civilian judicial investigation, as I said, non-militarized approaches to address the issue. And we also need to work and strengthen civilian traditional authorities in the Amazon that have been in charge of providing security to these people for centuries. So we need to work with them in strengthening them in how communities can develop their own protocols and also how to collaborate with civilian authorities. The other part that I mentioned as well in addressing violence, we need to bring protection mechanisms. How we plan to address violence in the region if we don't have effective protection mechanisms? And also we need to, another idea is to bring reparations for victims of these crimes in Amazonian countries. We have seen different types of crime. We have victims of sexual violence. We have victims of human trafficking. We have victims of several kinds. So bring a perspective of reparation as part of a comprehensive strategy, not only just prosecuting people, because the issue will repeat again over and over. So I'll leave that over to you.
Very, very insightful, Manaka. Thank you. And I think we have a follow-up question that I'm going to ask to Rodrigo. It's a question from my good friend Nuno Goldfin, who is a producer and documentarist based in Brazil. He's asking, how do you see the role of the Brazilian military force in the Amazon Security Police at this moment? I know Manaka is talking about non-militarization, but for the context here, if you don't know, in the past decades, we have seen a key role of, or a key presence of the military, the Brazilian military in the Amazon. They're effectively part of the policies, either you like it or not. But what's your opinion of the role of the Brazilian military, Rodrigo? You've been working in these regions.
It depends. There's some from the military recording. If not, I can. I'm just kidding. They have a contradictory role. It's more of a political role, because since the Brazilian and the last dictatorship, they kind of had to have a new role for themselves as an institution in Brazil. So they choose the Amazon. And by choosing the Amazon, let's say that meant just military occupy the Amazon with a military star, building headquarters along borders and building big facilities across the Amazon to take control of the territory, especially on the border with Colombia, where the FARC was a big threat. Having that said, I don't know much of they do there because I have been living the border. I have been living the Amazon state, which is basically the biggest headquarters of Brazilian army outside Rio de Janeiro, and I've never seen them on the field. What I have witnessed that low-rank soldiers that's from communities nearby, they're really, let's say so, they're the real soldiers, and when they go to expeditions they're really good, but high rank commanders, I don't know why they do that, because that's happened on their iWatch and nothing happened. Let's talk about again the Japura region gold mining site. We have a big military facility on the border in Villa Betancourt, and it's happening the gold mining site in Juami, and especially in Puruá River for the past 4 years, maybe, that grew, that exploded. And for that time, where were they? Why they went there to check it out, how the solution was, how the situation was? Why it needed for journalists very boldly to risk their life to go there to really see what was going on when they had all the information and all the equipment and manpower to do so? That's my question. So I don't know if I've been too political, maybe I am, but in my experience as an institution, they play a rhetoric role in securing the territory, because the fact is the Amazon territory, especially on the borders and on other not so populated territories, are not ruled by the Brazilian state, are ruled by criminal gangs. And if they were afraid that some foreign countries like France or whatever would take the Amazon away, it didn't happen. Our own criminal groups took those territories from the Brazilian state, from the Brazilian federal state. So I don't know. What more can you say?
That's the big contradiction that we see in the security agenda in the Amazon, right? Like let's say the surface is a lot of sovereignty discourses and concerns, but they actually doesn't actually reflect this concern that we see on the speeches of either military or the politicians. Actually, there's one question here that is a good follow-up. Carola Ramos is asking about the involvement of communities in these areas that you worked on. I mean, they are working as guardians of, or they are working directly in some of this, let's say, enterprises, illegal enterprises. How did you reflect the communities in your reporting, and what are insights? Maybe we start with you, Bram, and Rodrigo and Manaka can contribute.
Okay, well, this is an answer I don't really like giving, because of course, in journalism there's a certain sense of romanticization of what we from the outside world consider is the Amazon and our communities, but it's not always that beautiful. In the Amazon, we encounter incredible ancestral knowledge, coping mechanism, and happiness, but we also find abuse, suicide, and violence. Especially at this historical crossroads between all these expanding illicit economies, global powers pushing corporate interest in the Amazon, we feel that oftentimes local communities are left behind, and the only ones who are basically giving them a tool to at least sustain themselves are these criminal organizations. So yes, communities are oftentimes involved in these illicit economies, but they don't like it. But if someone needs to choose about feeding their children or cutting a tree, they always will cut a tree. If they need to access healthcare and pay medical bill, you need money. And sometimes the only economy is the illicit economy. But then, for example, if we take a look at Venezuela, where we've seen expansion of Colombian guerrilla organizations recruiting indigenous miners, youth into their forces, which is something we've always seen in Colombia, where we oftentimes speak about forced recruitment. But in Venezuela, it's not forced at gunpoint, but it's forced by a humanitarian and deep economic political crisis. We have parents basically handing over their children to the guerrilla because it's the only actor who can feed them and give them a roof to sleep under. So oftentimes we see that there's some kind of involvement of local communities as maybe cheap labor force in these economies, which also doesn't mean that they don't have agency. So for me, this is a very delicate line. And of course, I know I need to watch my words here as well, but it's very important, especially when we speak about policy responses. Again, there is a lot of money now for combating environmental crimes in the Amazon, but we don't have good public policies nor coherent responses. So what we oftentimes see is that these governments go after the low-hanging fruit, which is the local man with the chainsaw cutting down a tree, which is the local miner. But there's still not enough capacity or political will, and this has to do with corruption, to go after the financiers of deforestation and environmental crimes, which oftentimes are politicians themselves, state governors or entrepreneurs owning large-scale companies. And I think that, because I see also a question about the OTCAM meeting, I think that it's very important that governments agree, maybe what Manaka also indicated, there needs to be a framework about what are environmental crimes, how should we investigate and prosecute the offenders. And oftentimes these white-collar criminals financing those are the ones who can rule without being touched, and this needs to change. So I think that maybe outside donors or other foreign allies can help with capacity building, especially when it comes to intelligence unit who need to track down the money flows and the buyers of commodities that contribute to these environmental crimes.
I'm sorry, I was mute. I was saying, like, Rodrigo, Manaka, do you want to comment on any of these aspects? I know it's a delicate question, so any comment? Okay. Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, I wasn't directly involved in the investigation, so it's more responsible for Fran and Rodrigo. But I'll say that I'll always advocate for people's participation. But I understand that trust is one of the key issues to overcome. So in communities, it's hard for people to assess who they can trust. So it's hard. So this is something in which we should work more. And as I mentioned, and this is the third time that I mentioned this topic, protection mechanisms again. So I'll leave it at that, Gustavo.
There's one question here from Emilio Villanova, which I think can help us to go deeper on this issue. So Emilio is asking about the feasibility of implementing the bioeconomy approach. As you probably heard, there's a lot of discussion right now about transitioning the illicit economy or the traditional economy or the resource-intensive economy to a more sustainable model, which we are calling bioeconomy. So things like carbon credits and other models. But we're seeing problems with these projects, especially on carbon credits affecting local communities and indigenous people, which are interested on taking advantage and gain some resources while protecting the forest. So I think the question is, how feasible is to do this transition, in your opinion? Maybe Manaka, you were looking at public policy, you can give us some insights, and we'll be open to hear from Rodrigo as well.
Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Start, Rodrigo. What do you think?
Now it's my time to be good. Okay. I don't see as a carbon credit market as a solution to Amazonian environmental issues. Not at all, not by far. First, by concept, it's totally away from the Amazonian way of doing things. It's like we have a solution that was made and thought in a way of seeing things that's far away from the Amazon. So it won't work there as we think. So that's like more like a theoretical approach. The second one, it will be that I think talking about carbon credit thing, it will be we are giving time to in a place where you don't have time. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're discussing how to make laws about credit, carbon markets, how to implement them, and then it will work, and that it can help, etc., etc., it will pass like for 5, 10, 15 years, and we don't have that much of time to just put all of this effort and one solution that doesn't seem to tackle the problem, which will be how the global market and its dynamic affects the Amazon region. So if you're talking seriously about how to implement a bioeconomy, we don't know, like around the world, everyone's trying to solve this, but we don't have like a plan or scenario that we can say that definitely it will work. I would say, so if we're talking serious about it, we have to go to the Amazon, not us, but everyone who is interested in the topic, and make a solution from the Amazon to the outside, because all the pressure that's degrading, deforesting, etc., taking over the Amazon are pressures from the outside of the Amazon. So we have to kind of reverse the dynamic from within the Amazon, create projects and dynamics that will expel all this pressure out of those territories. Without taking that into account, I don't see any approach to be feasible to have a really good I don't know, to have a really good result.
Okay, so maybe to add to that, I think it's very important that I think Rodrigo makes some excellent points, but also to take into account that there is no legal framework yet around carbon credits in Colombia and around Brazil. So we get all those carbon credit cowboys making up the weirdest contracts, and it becomes another extractive industry, you know, exploiting the presence of indigenous populations in the forest for financial gain for actors foreign to the Amazon, which is happening on a wide scale now. What we also see is that Colombian non-state armed groups know which communities are receiving money from carbon credit projects, and they demand a cut. So this means that carbon credits, if not done carefully, if not consulted over and over again with indigenous populations, becomes just another economy that's financing violence and conflict in the Amazon.
That's a great point, Bran. And I remember that while you're working in Amazon Underworld, we had another fellow in Colombia working for El Clip, Andrés Bermúdez Diviano, who did an amazing series of stories about some of these carbon cowboys in Colombia and the conflicts that they're generating. Most recently, we've seen some of these cases also exposed by Brazilian media. So it is difficult and demands our attention. But we have one final question from Ivan that Bran touched about the current meeting in Belém. So I wanted to ask about this kind of a high-level police presidents meeting and making joint declarations. Are you optimistic about this movement? To make your life a bit easier, I can give my own opinion. I mean, like after years of known declaration, known commitment, we've seen, you know, like not taking a political side at all, but the truth is like the OTCA, which is the organization for the Treaty of the Amazon countries, it was stopped for the past 10 years. So there was no commitment at all, you know, like they're not just meeting at all to discuss the Amazon. So it is a step having this meeting now in a way, but what can we expect? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can try to take it as I'm physically the closest to the summit. There's a lot of corporate powers moving around the summit as well. Amazon economies is definitely one of the pillars that's being discussed. I think for starters, it's always positive that country leaders meet to talk about nature conservation, and this is definitely happening. And we know that the whole world is looking as well, because the Amazon is one of our key buffers to adapt to climate change and to mitigate it. And if we keep destroying the Amazon, and the Amazon will start its cycle of auto destruction and CO2 emissions, it might become our worst enemy. So there is a huge interest in conserving the Amazon rainforest. But then we also fear that these summits are used for greenwashing, which not only happens by corporations, but also by governments, not to name any countries in particular now. But this is going on here as well at the summit of OTCA. And we think that it's very important to come up with state policies instead of political strategies, because as we know, there is very few time left to save the Amazon. We have two progressive presidents in the two largest Amazon countries with the biggest Amazon economies, which are Colombia and Brazil. They also know they need to act now, because in a few years, the whole political panorama in Latin America can change quickly, as always happens. So it sounds cliche, but it's a bit of a now or never moment. So we hope that the summit comes up with a very ambitious strategy, because if it stays at, we won't have any deforestation by 2030, and most presidents won't be around by then, that's not ambitious enough.
Yeah, I think Bram brilliant put it. I agree with Bram. And also to take a step further, I think the results of this meeting, it will be if they take this decisive steps onto, for instance, during oil and the Amazon projects. If they tackle that, it will be a big step. If they don't, maybe you're seeing more of the same in terms of discourse and etc. So we have to see after the meeting if they take some big steps to actually prevent more of extractive, invasive economies in the Amazon. So on my opinion, we have just to wait to see for the next few days. And from my perspective, I don't think they will take these big steps, for instance, and forbidding drilling oil plants on Brazilian coast of the Amazon, for instance. So.
I can add, it's not perfect, it's not complete, but I am in the optimistic side of it. And I just want to highlight the key role of civil society in monitoring what will happen next. What is going to happen after this summit in the Amazon? It is key. It's up to us to monitor, to keep demanding, to see if the promises will be made or not, and continue. This is a lifetime challenge. So it's not only today, it's not only this summit. And I want to say that I feel particularly important how this information was presented during this summit. And I think it contributes already significantly in calling the attention in communicating something that is difficult, but also to showing what at certain extent we already knew. So indigenous leaders have been saying this for years, but if you show it with evidence, with all the connections, so it gives us additional information that is important for decision makers. So I'm happy that I hope to see how that really works and how decision makers will take that into account. So thanks, Gustavo and Rodrigo.
Thank you. I think we're getting to close to the end, and we have one comment here from Ricky Bazzi. I suppose I'm reading correct the name, which I think summarizes a lot of what we are thinking here. And I'm going to read this comment, but you were free to send more questions. We're willing to stay a little bit longer if you have burning questions. But what Mr. Bazzi says, I suppose also is a man, sorry. Thank you so much for this discussion and the importance of having a work like this that engages on this important issue. And it is heartening to hear that there is a renewed opportunity to engage progressive governments on addressing these crimes. And the question is, like, can we get a sense of the steps that have been taken recently by civil society and the indigenous group and foreign allies, governments to discuss this kind of problem and how receptive this kind of information has been in their agendas. And if there's, I think the main question here is if there's any initiatives that are succeeding on making this transition and taking the Amazon out of the control of the illicit economies.
So maybe this is also a bit in the line of thinking of the last question. In Belém, we've met with the upcoming president of OTCA. He knows the research, is very interested, and our task as journalists as well is to keep confronting power, and we will continue to investigate this and filter the message to the highest level of policymakers, because of course there is interest. And I think that the OTCA, it has been a bit of a zombie. This is an organization that exists decades already, but no one heard of it, knows what they're doing, and they barely meet. So I think that this summit now is very important, and I hope that the new OTCA leadership also takes the initiative to keep these regional meetings going, because Latin America lacks a multilateral platform that functions, that focuses on environmental issues. So I think the OTCA, reviving it, basically reviving the zombie, might actually work. So that's why I hope that government leaders are enthusiastic to make strong statements, look for international financiation, and continue with it. Of course, we have governments now where indigenous communities do have representatives, in Colombia, in Brazil, but we also think that civil society is a very strong voice, which we've seen this week here, and they keep putting forward proposals. And there are some governments that are willing to listen, but I think that alternative governance systems incentivized by these communities are definitely of crucial importance because they have the long breath.
I also would mention, to help here on answering, that we have very, like ambitious proposal, like the one Rodrigo was mentioning coming from Colombia, of banning oil exploration in the Amazon. We don't actually think here in Brazil that is going to take place immediately, but is put on the table, which is something already. At the same time, I would mention the important role of very, like strong and influential indigenous leadership at this point, like the one who was meeting with Bram to know about Amazon Underworld, Alessandra Munduruku, which is a leadership defending the right of indigenous women to participate on the political debate. And they're also showing that there's, like a willingness of indigenous people to move and not allowing the gold mining take control. She's a very strong voice against the advance of gold mining in the central part of Brazil. So we've been seeing a lot of struggle, which I see as a positive thing, as a resistance to the illicit economies, if you like. And yeah, on that note, which I think it's give us a lot of hope, I would like to thank our participants. We don't have any other questions, but I invite you all to keep looking at the AmazonUnderworld.org website and the partners website as well, either in Armando Info Amazonia, or La Liga contra el Silencio. Other partners in the region, as Bram was saying, local radios and local outlets might be publishing stories very soon. So keep an eye on these stories. I think the important message that was brought here is that there's an issue that needs to, to be tackled and covered for the next years. It's not one project, not one journalist, as we usually say. It's like a collaboration of many journalists, many projects, many organizations. So we also would like to thank a lot the participation of Manaka and the Open Society Foundation, a great partner of this project with our Rainforest Investigations Network. With that, thank you all. It was great to see this large attendance. We're very proud of the number of attendees, because we just launched the call last Friday. So it shows to us there is a lot of interest in this issue. We'll keep doing our best to inform you. So keep in touch. As you know, the Pulitzer Center has several opportunities for journalists, documentaries, photographers to keep doing this kind of coverage. So take a look on our website and opportunities for funding, and keep in touch, as I said, and thank you. Ciao, ciao. Thank you, Bram, Rodrigo, and Manaka. I think we'll close here, stop recording.